Welcome to the Seeing Red podcast with Andy Turner and Garrett Fools, checking up on Texas policies and politics with some federal issues thrown in, like the assault weapons ban, interest rate hikes, you get it, but it's mostly Texas, since we can't ignore the big stuff either. And now, here are your hosts, Andy Turner and Garrett Fools.
Welcome back to this week's episode of Seeing Red. We have a great episode in store for you. Andy, unfortunately, is out sick, but we got a great guest today. He's a nominee for the Texas House, and you've probably heard of him if you've been on Texas Ledge Twitter. It's Mitch Little. He's a partner with the law firm of Sheaf and Stone and was part of the team of lawyers who successfully defended Ken Paxton's impeachment in the trial in the Texas Senate. He is now the Republican nominee for Texas House District 65, which I believe is mostly in Denton County, if not all in Denton County, and one of the original drafters and signers of the contract with Texas, or for Texas. I want to welcome to the show today, Mitch Little. Thank you for joining us, Mitch. How are you today?
I'm so good. I'm glad to join you. Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. So you are running, your district you're running for, is it all in Denton County?
Yeah, it's all in Denton County, so I didn't have to drive to Austin to file. I got to do that at GOP headquarters in Denton. Thank goodness.
And then contract with Texas. I've seen it. We've talked about it a little bit. We've been kind of critical of it. But
yeah,
why don't you
think about it? What do you think about it?
I think it's mostly politics. And when I've dug into it, I've just found it mostly to be rule changes that either can't. Well, I don't have the specifics in front of me. My gut is that some of them are constitutional changes that need to get done, and some of them would be things that might be good for a few years, but once you change the rules, if the Democrats ever get closer to 75 or take it over, it could be something that really bites us in the butt in the long term.
Yeah, so let me kind of share with you the genesis for it. A conservative caucus, we'll call it, in the Texas House of existing members and primary winners came together, and we got in a conference room and we talked about the things that we would like to see changed about the Texas House, and the things that in talking to the voters in our districts, the things that they would like to see changed. And obviously you have kind of the big side of the bus issue, which is banning Democrat chairs. That's something that is very much on the mind of the voters in our districts, and I think in part animated some of the primary. So banning Democrat chairs was kind of a no-brainer in our group. The other things really formed around how the existing members and the candidates saw the function or dysfunction of the Texas House as a result of how leadership was installed and managed. So the things like Republican majorities on House committees, a Republican speaker pro tem, term limit on the speaker. We thought that one was very significant. And certainly the distribution of campaign funds at the speaker's whim to other members. We can go kind of item by item, but the thing came together surprisingly very quickly. So the group of people that were among the initial signers, we got it drafted, got it in front of them. There was actually precious little discussion even really about it. Everyone was pretty much in alignment. And then within another week, we essentially doubled in size with the number of signers, with the people who are still in runoffs or other primary winners who had an opportunity to jump on with it. So what was surprising to me was how quickly we got into alignment around the things that you see on the contract. And to your point, is some of it political? Absolutely. I think by definition, it's all political. Yeah, because it speaks to the function of the political body itself and how power is distributed among the members. I think we're seeing a future, or I think the people who signed it are seeing a future where power and authority is going to be more distributed among the members and less speaker centric, if that makes sense.
I get where you're coming from with that, but I guess my question would be how do you envision the House looking after these rules take place? Do you think, and then why? Like, why do you think banning Dem chairs ends up equaling a certain result? right? Or whatever those results may be. But why, like, so let's say you like ban them chairs, pro tem, and then committee makeup. Like, what is the actual goal? And are you looking at House Republican power or House member power generally?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's both, but it's probably more the latter than the former. So here's how I see it, and I'm just obviously one voice and one participant in the process, and other people may see it differently. But to me, the most significant change that comes out of the contract with Texas is taking some of that power out of the speaker's hands and distributing it back to the membership. So, from the perspective of an outsider, which is admittedly what I am, someone who's coming into the legislature for the first time, what we've had in Texas for a long period of time is a very strong speakership and a leadership cadre that really it essentially determines which bills can get to the floor and independent of the rest of the caucus. So you have people who are in control of calendars, who are in control of which legislation really gets to see the light of day. I think that historically, what the speaker has done in Texas, whether it's Phelan, Bonin, or Strauss, is they have used the Democrat chairs and used the parliamentarian as a mechanism to carry out the speaker's intent. And fundamentally, our hope is, or at least my hope is, that it's going to be the grassroots intent that is going to be carried through the legislature as opposed to the leadership cadre.
So I guess my question for you then would be, where constitutionally speaking, there are certain rules that the House has to abide by when it comes to selecting a speaker, and then with certain legislation, how it gets passed, it has to since it's a constitutional amendment, it has to have 100 votes.
Rule.
Yeah. So like, and those are rules that are constitutionally mandated. You can't just change them with, a majority vote one time or whatever else. So I guess with those kind of more of the realistic kind of parameters of how these things come in place, what are, I guess, is it in the contract? And then, but if not, what are the kind of mechanisms to protect the interests you're trying to protect?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, let's begin with the end in mind. If the end is to elect a speaker out of the House Republican caucus, the ideal process would be that you've got a caucus that meets and determines who the speaker is going to be on its own without the influence of Democrats, which historically has been happening in our state for a while. So what you're going to have to, and to your point, I think this is kind of the milieu of your podcast. What's going to have to happen is the Republican caucus is going to have to move as one. Eventually, they're going to have to come together and decide, this is our candidate. This may not be the perfect candidate, but it's the one who's going to bring about enough reforms that everyone can coalesce around, so that we don't have to go back to the Democrats and create a power base there. So my hope is that the speaker is going to come exclusively out of the Republican caucus, and we can have confidence in, even if it's not your person, if you're someone outside the legislature, you're going, I wish it wasn't that person. At least you can have confidence that the process that yielded the result was carried out in the right way. So that goes to the issue of electing the speaker. I've heard some of the complaints about the 60-day rule, and I think one of the fundamental problems that conservatives have in the legislature right now is that they come into session, they're leaving their families, they're leaving their business, and the first 60 days essentially are a wash. And not only that, we get through the first 60 days, and then we get deeper into session, and they see Democrat priorities coming to the floor before some of the Republican legislative priorities that came out of convention. That's not something that just frustrates me. It frustrates everybody in my Senate convention. So as we're getting closer to convention, you're going to start to hear more from the people who are actually doing the work within the party. And the people that I've talked to at our Senate convention are very aware of this concern, very aware of the problem that Democrat priorities are essentially trumping or cutting the line ahead of Republican legislative priorities. And they'd like to see the process go differently. So ideally, what would happen is you'd have real legislation being debated or worked on earlier in the session, priority legislation, and seeing Republican legislation come to the forefront first. I think that fundamentally that seems to be what people want.
I think there is value, and this is a little bit more of a longer thought. There is
Yeah, please.
some value in Democrats taking the lead on certain issues because it gives cover whenever it's implemented. And like the example I use is the ISD takeover rules, how they got changed recently. That was led by a Democrat from Houston named Harold Dutton, and he was the education chair at the time, and he was the one who spearheaded how those rules changed, particularly because he was fed up with how HISD was failing his district.
Yeah.
And so now that TEA, Republican controlled TEA took it over, like it was with, I mean, it's a contentious thing. It still has some blowback on Republicans, but it's bipartisan. It's not just Republicans going after a Democrat area or whatever. So he ends up giving, so like you have these times where, it might be, there's elements of something that might be a Democrat priority, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't align with the goals of, or a Democrat's priority doesn't mean it doesn't align with the goals of the Republican Party generally, because not every representative is going to. I mean, a lot of Democrats vote with Republicans on some issues. Like,
very well said.
So
yeah,
I guess
very well said, Garrett. I totally agree with you. I think most legislation that comes through the House has some bipartisan support. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah, and so HISD is really an us problem. It's not just a them problem. I mean, we're talking about everyone's kids, and so that's something everyone should be working on together. I think if you look at the primary frustrations, it's the lack of attention to the ledge priorities. So, for example, if you just take the last session, waiting way too long to take up school choice, election integrity, some of the chicanery that went on with Second Amendment, red flag laws, among other things. So when you talk about the legislative priorities truly being that, I think Republicans back home expect us to take them up first.
I understand the wanting to take it up first, but it doesn't necessarily, just because it doesn't get voted on doesn't mean it hasn't been taken up. Because the committee process works the way it does, and if it's not getting through, it's because there's not votes for it. Because the school choice, as your example, it got to the floor and it failed. Now a lot of those members got primaried, but it did get there, and we got a result, and it wasn't what a lot of people wanted, and then some members lost their jobs over it. But to your point, you want to have that vote eventually, but if the goal was ultimately to get legislation passed and not just to win elections, then you have to let the process work itself out. So I understand that, the convention goers, for certainly as a convention attendee last 2022 and a delegate for 2024, like I understand what they're saying and I get it. Like you want action, you want it now. But you still have to work with people's districts, because you have representatives like Morgan Meyer in Highland Park, or I'm blanking on some of the people's names right now, but you have some of these people in these districts. You have Lopez down 37, where like these are in Biden districts. Biden won the districts, and they're not necessarily going to be. You're going to have to fight for things. So you have to make sure that in those situations that like the legislation we hold the seat so we can gain credibility. My thing is, you have to look at it as like political capital. You have to govern well. You have to do your job. Like you have to do the basics of your job, and then you get credibility enough with your constituents that you can say, like, okay, I want to go a little bit further on this issue because I think we've done well here, here, and here. You have to prove to the people, like in every district, not just at the convention or in our party.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think one piece of legislation that is kind of emblematic of this issue that I'm talking about, Garrett, is Lois Kolkhorst's Senate bill that came over barring China, Iran, Russia, North Korea from owning real estate in the state of Texas, and then that piece of legislation that essentially sailed through the Senate, dying a death in state affairs without ever getting a floor vote, really without ever materially getting advanced. So I think the people that we need to convince back home, they want to see those bills come to the floor for a vote. If it fails, it fails. But what they don't want to see is gamification of the process where we don't get a floor vote on things that are that significant, which I don't really know why State Affairs never let the bill out, but I'm not sure it matters to most of the people in my district who voted in the primary.
My understanding, and I worked behind the scenes on that a little bit, kind of like,
Yeah, tell me about it.
But was basically that 147 changed a lot from initial draft. I mean, most things, the initial draft, it got changed a little bit. Added some stuff, got some stuff taken out, and there was some similar legislation in the House, but it basically came to there was like 4 different bills, and there was just fights over which bill would get through, and then people just ended up knifing the other people's bill because theirs isn't the one that didn't get through. Which is a stupid reason for it to not pass, but is the reason I believe of why it happened. But yeah, I mean, to your point, that's definitely legislation. I fully think that we should restrict it.
Yeah.
And there are many levels in which I think it's okay, but also I'm a civil liberties person. I think we should protect certain folks but then then that's meat and potatoes legislative work of making sure you separate out people who are here legally, who are in the process of becoming you don't want to hurt people who are already on the track to become American citizens the legal way.
Totally agree with you, and I don't think we're talking about like,
and we're not. But some of the kickback on those
Yeah.
bills was like that was the perception in the media, and that was the other thing with that is that it made national news, and a lot of people just they put the brakes on. It's like, hey, we don't need more bad headlines right now, type thing.
Yeah, I sometimes a trope can be useful to kill a bill that you don't want to come through. And
Yeah.
I don't think anybody who brought the bill over from the Senate was thinking we need to make sure that nobody's buying a condo in Plano, Texas.
Right.
I think we all know what we're talking about, but
Yeah.
this is endemic with the leadership problem. If you have good leadership, they make sure that the right bills come through, and you don't have maybe these internecine squabbles over, well, my bill and not yours. Like, I just don't think anybody in my district.
I think that's going to happen when you have 150 people with the egos the size of the people in the Texas House, plus the egos of the Texas
I
Senate.
won't be one of those 150. I can assure you.
But no, that's good. You might actually get some stuff done. But that's. I guess so. I'm going to do we can keep the conversation going, but I did want to kind of change gears a little bit. And my understanding, and correct me if I get the titles wrong, was that you were the treasurer for your opponent in the cycle before.
Yes.
That, friends and, went to church together and whatnot.
Yes.
And then, the Paxton trial happened. You came out on one side, she voted the other way, among, I'm sure, other issues. But what ultimately just made you decide to run for that seat in particular? And then also just, what was your thought process? Because ultimately, what is your end goal? What is your goal for this position?
Yeah. So let me start from the beginning. Pain and frustration. So if you go back to 2018, wait, I want to make sure I have the year right, Garrett. Yeah, you go back to 2018. I was holding a sign at the polls on election day in November for Ron Simmons. And Ron Simmons lost to Michelle Beckley, the most left member of the Texas House. Basically, if you designed a liberal Democrat in a lab, you would get Michelle Beckley.
Yeah.
And so I think Ron was stunned. I think a lot of people were stunned. He just flat lost the race by a couple thousand votes. Yeah. And so the new reality is I'm represented by a Democrat in 2018. We get to 2020. Kronda Timish comes to me and tells me, hey, I'm going to run for this. Great. Let me throw your fundraiser. I had a fundraiser for it at my house during 2020. That was kind of weird. I mean, we had it outdoors on my patio. We had cocktail tables. I had a bar. People came by the house and delivered checks. I'm like, this is going great. And I like Kronda. She had served on school board, and she was willing to step up and take on Michelle. 2020, she loses to Michelle. All right. And this is still HD 65 at the time. I'm sorry, HD 63. And then the lines get redrawn in 2022. And so now our house is in our home is in 65, as is Kronda's. Kronda decides to run again. And it's kind of a fait accompli, demographic destiny. This is now a very red district. And she wins the primary against some not very strong opposition, as it turned out. Though some of those people were great supporters of mine and are wonderful friends. And so we go to 2022. She's successful. She has said all the right things on the campaign trail, and my belief is I'm voting for a real conservative. And as we went into the session, immediately everybody's with feeling. I was kind of surprised that she did that from the beginning, but I said, hey, maybe this is just the way it works, and everybody's got to manage or work around the leadership team in Austin, and I'm not going to hold that against her. Immediately abstained on the issue of school choice during the Herrera amendment to the budget. And I thought, wait a second, this is somebody who's supposed to be for school choice, voted with the Democrats on sports gambling and casino gambling, which I had a major problem with. So as we're going through the session, I'm like, what is going on? This seems disconsonant with the person I know and the person that campaigned. And then, of course, we get to the impeachment, and she, along with many other Republicans, votes for the impeachment. And I'm thinking, this is just the way things are, Garrett. And I understand that there are battles within the Republican Party, some of which we can fight, some of which we can't. Oh, well, what can anybody do about anything like that? And so I had no intention of running against Cronda. We got up to the impeachment, got up to Labor Day. I was part of the impeachment defense team. I spent the whole summer preparing for the impeachment. And then I got to Austin, and I spent some time around the impeachment managers and people who had been appointed to run that trial on behalf of the House. And what I started to realize, Garrett, and I don't think this will offend you, is that there are a lot of people in Austin who just don't believe in anything. They don't have an animating set of beliefs, and whether on the right or on the left, for some people it's just naked power. And how do I gain political power, and how do I preserve political power to my benefit? So I didn't particularly like that. I got home and I started thinking about all these issues, prayed about it, talked to a lot of people, spent some time thinking about whether to run. And ultimately, I decided, if it's not going to be me, who's it going to be? And I decided to just take that leap of faith. But before I left for the impeachment trial, I kind of skipped a step. In August, I sat down with Cronda and I said, this is before I decided to run for anything. I said, I've been your treasurer. I don't think you and I are in alignment anymore on some of these things. And I laid out the things for her that I had laid out for you about some of the votes in session. And I hugged her and I said, I love your family. Still going to see you in church. And I'm probably not going to support this anymore. And she understood, and we moved on. And then the primary came, and it was full contact. Yeah, as I think you probably know.
Primaries usually
as they tend to be.
Yeah.
And
the better you know your opponent, the more personal they get.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
Yeah, no, I saw a lot of them from afar. Yours looked like it got pretty personal.
It was tough. And I try to generally give people as much grace as I possibly can. I think it was just tough. But what made it tougher, Garrett, I think, is I kind of became an avatar for the impeachment and the speaker's authority.
You became a meme.
I did. I mean, we can't. Yeah, I really can't deny that.
If your kids aren't doing that for like a wrapping paper for like birthday and Christmas, I don't have any faith in the next generation.
No, I try to not expose them to too much of that stuff, but it's all in good jest. And it was, the impeachment itself was just this historical event. I'll tell you just a funny story. Like, I was going through the first week of the trial, and I was in a bubble, basically, Garrett. I mean, I knew the media was there, but I didn't understand how many people were focused on it. And like, as the trial is going on, this exposure is getting more and more and more. I'm driving home on Friday of the first week of the impeachment. I'm driving straight home from Austin to be with my family, take them to church, do my kid's birthday, and my friend texts me. He's like, Donald Trump Jr. is retweeting video of you, and I'm like, I'm like in the car. I'm in like maybe Temple driving back, and I go, things may be changing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're playing with live ammo when you're doing something like that.
So
That's
you're
for
not
sure.
kidding. It was, yeah, there's some big ordinance involved in that.
Well, I guess now that you're the nominee, some folks think that, I mean, you should definitely take your general election seriously. You have portions of UNT in your district, right? Or do you have all of it?
No, I don't know if you've looked at this map recently, but
Uh-huh.
Denton County is laid out really weird. It's like a 7-layer dip.
Uh-huh.
Like Baumgartner's to the south of me, and then
Mm-hmm.
it's me, and then on top of me is Richard Hayes, and on top of that is Andy Hopper and Lynn Stuckey. So,
Uh-huh.
yeah, Denton is primarily that Stuckey Hopper situation up there. My
Gotcha.
district was R plus 18 in the last election. So without Trump. So if you go to 2022, we were R plus 18.
Yeah,
I'm taking it very seriously. And really, Garrett, the reason I'm doing that is I want to meet as many people as I can. I
it's
mean,
good.
when I was at the polls and in early voting and on election day, I probably met 3,000 people. I mean, in the course of a couple weeks. So I'm like, I've got a lot more people to meet. We got a couple 100,000 people who live here.
I guess beyond the legislative priorities that the convention lays out, I'm sure those will be your top or whatever else. But beyond that, what are your personal legislative priorities for the upcoming session? And what are your non-legislative priorities for your office? Are there ways in which you want to help your constituents in a particular way, or whatever else? Because what a lot of people don't know, I mean, people watching this podcast probably do, but a lot of people don't know generally is that one of the major jobs of a representative is to be an ombudsman for people with the state government issues they might have with the DMV or something like that. So, is anything in particular you want to lay out for in those regards?
Man, great questions. All right, let me start with the first one. So, legislative priorities that come out of the convention are obviously going to be the ones that animate me. Some other things that I'm thinking about. Putting the Ten Commandments back in schools, I think is something that's on my mind. The Chinese land bill, that I think we need to finish the job there. Um, the school choice thing is going to be very different than the way the last session ended, I think. And I think there's going to be an inordinate amount of energy expended on both sides on this issue because the
Mm-hmm.
bill is going to change. Maybe it'll be bigger. And yes, there is this looming school finance thing that is going on and not going away because the school districts, like if you took Louisville ISD, I think they're between 16 and 18 million dollars in the red on their budget. I think Frisco's 30 million dollars in the red, and there is no more there. They're taking out of their future funds, or they're taking out of their essentially their savings, their captive savings, to be able to meet that shortfall with the expectation that the legislature is going to modify the way that or the amount of money that they're committing to it, or modify the way that they're financed. Um, Louisville is sending $36 million in recapture funds to Austin, and
Yep.
they're 16 to 18 million dollars under budget. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out where they could get that money from, right? Um,
It
so,
does take a rocket scientist to figure out the math for how that works, but
boy,
yes,
you are not joking. I doubt there are 5 people in the state who could explain it to you.
I don't think
And
there's one.
yeah, you may be right about that. So, um, yeah, I wouldn't say that I have a lot of discrete personal legislative issues that are really animating my campaign. But what I have learned is the second part of your question could not be more right. You become this arbiter, yeah, or ombudsman, as you put it, of things that are going on in your district, and you're kind of trying to mediate them on behalf of the government, or you're an intermediary for that
Yeah.
relationship. And here's one place that I really see it uh, happening on the road ahead. So if you look at my district, Garrett, it runs from on the east side, Carrollton and Louisville, all the way out to Argyle, Roanoke, North Lake. up against Tarrant County. So the western
Oh,
end of my
okay.
district is very red and still quite rural. In the eastern end, you've got Carrollton and Louisville. You're kind of your traditional suburbs.
Mhm.
But on the more rural end, there's a lot of development going on, a lot of growth in North Lake, Argyle, places like that. But the infrastructure is just not there to support it all yet.
Right.
Roads that are big enough, water, sewer, grocery stores. There's going to need to be support for all this growth, and it needs to be prudent. So you have this tension in my district between people who want their way of life preserved. They don't want to bring in a lot of outside development, and then you have other adjacent even towns that are very pro development that are like, make this more convenient for me.
Right.
So I think fundamentally we're going to be kind of mitigating those issues as we go on through the years, trying to figure out what this district is going to be long term.
One of the things I heard a lot in 2014 from Todd Staples, who was ag commissioner, running for lieutenant governor, obviously lost, and now is the president of Texoga. But one of his sayings was, there are toll roads and there are tax roads. There are no free roads. But people don't look at it that way. So just whenever you're looking at that, get a real vibe for what your constituents think for whether tax roads or toll roads, because one way or the other,
you're
going to get paid for.
Right. What do you think is going to happen at convention? You said you're going to be a delegate. I'm going to be a delegate. Yeah. What do you see brewing?
I think it's going to be, I don't think any of the candidates are going to get enough regardless of what happens out of the Senate district. So for those who don't know, the way that these chair races work is that you vote in your Senate district and you select a nominee from your Senate district. There's a nominations committee, and then the nominations committee puts forth a candidate, and they are the person who automatically is nominated. If you've won at least 3 of your Senate districts, then a Senate district, because there's 31. If you were the nominee from each of those, you are eligible to be voted on upon the floor. It happened in 2022 for vice chair, but there's only 2 candidates. There's only 1 vote. I think there's going to be enough people to win enough seats that there's going to be a multi-way thing on the floor, and it's going to get a little crazy. So you're going to have a lot of them. So you're going to have a rules committee that's far more important than usual. You're going to have a 2-tiered race, because what's the other thing people forget is that the chair is one gender and the vice chair has to be the opposite gender. Right. So you only kind of know who the vice chair candidates are, because you don't know until the chairperson's race is over. No, it's chairman. You just call him chairman. But but so it's going to be, I think it's going to be, there's going to be a lot of talk about platforms and whatever priorities. I don't think much is going to get done, because I think too much time is going to be spent on the chair. So I think it's going to end up being a slimmed down version of those fights from in the past, because I think the other ones are going to take longer.
Well, that would be very on brand for 2024, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
High conflict. So what do you?
And it's going to be weird dividing lines, because there's so many people running for the different seats, and I'm not sure how they're going to coalesce after those first votes.
Well, you're very connected in this world, so I want to ask your opinion. How do you see the philosophical differences between the various candidates? Like how do you see them as being differentiated?
It's mostly a differentiation of priorities and expectations. So I think and part of that you put on to people who they are, it's association, right? So
sure,
you see who's endorsing who, and like, okay, that's whatever else. So I think that I guess the major issues at play are, how much should we get involved in local nonpartisan elections? How much of a focus should we put on fundraising, and how much of a focus should we put on how do I put that? I mean, sticking to Republican priorities, convention priorities, and then Rule 44 stuff, which, if people don't know, is ways of which you can censure and punish an elected official.
Sure.
And I basically, having followed it some and watched some stuff, I said I was going to mention this last week, and I mentioned it this week. There is a video forum for all these people tomorrow. It's being hosted by a group here in Houston. I don't remember who's hosting it, but I'll have a link down in the description for folks who want to watch that. Or on Wednesday. It's going to be coming out around noon on Wednesday. But you have Garcia, you have Meyer, you have Ben Ariata or Todd Aritada. I don't know how to say his name.
Ben Armenta.
And then you have Weston Martinez and Abraham George.
Yeah.
I think Weston will have a certain cohort of people who've known him. He's run for a lot of stuff, so he has people who know him, and he'll but I think he has a pretty high or a pretty low ceiling. But he has a relatively high floor, and so he'll end up probably with 8 or 10%. He might be able to win enough Senate districts to be eligible for the floor. Then you have people, a lot of different people endorsing Dana, a lot of different people endorsing Abraham and Mike Garcia. I haven't seen as much about. You just said his name, Ben Armenta.
Yeah.
I've seen him. He's from Fort Bend County. I don't know him.
He's close to you. Like, how do you
know?
Know?
Katie and Sugar Land aren't that close. And they don't like the mix.
Sure.
But I probably met him, but I don't recall meeting him. I guess should say. But he was at the convention, the Senate district conventions. So I think it's going to come down to Garcia, Meyer, and George, and it really depends on, how those people are talking to the convention delegates, and even more so than a race like yours, where you can poll people in your district. You can pull people in here too, but they're used to it, and they're getting 10 texts a day. They're probably not going through. You're not going to get anything accurate. So,
oh my gosh, I've been getting polls. Have you been getting polls on your phone like I have?
Yes, nonstop.
Yeah. It's not cheap, by the way. It's
no.
Ask me how I know.
So I know. I what do I think's going to happen? I think, and you probably have a different opinion of this. We've been highly critical of Matt Rinaldi. I think enough people are annoyed at the least with the amount of money in the coffers of the party, to the amount of defense going into 2024. Sure. That they're going to want. Then that coalition will probably break down a little bit more, and it'll go to Meyer or Garcia. That's just my guess. I don't have anything. That's just my inkling, but. I could ask me again tomorrow. I'll probably say something different.
Yeah, the parties will be fun if nothing else.
Yeah. Usually, conventions are fun. I love the conventions; they're great.
Yeah.
So I think that that's kind of where I feel it. But then on the priority on all the other stuff, who knows what the platform committees and the platform and legislative priorities committees are going to look like.
Yeah,
I think it's going to be mostly school choice will be the big thing, and then like you said, 147. And then other stuff, banning more on the obscenities in schools, probably more school-related stuff.
Yeah,
beyond school funding.
More DEI stuff, more critical race theory, DEI stuff. Especially given that, it's been fascinating watching what's going on campuses. Unfortunately, nothing really took a super big foothold at UT or A&M or anywhere like that. Because once they're in, it's very tough to dig them out, as you can see on television.
Yeah.
But to some extent, just shows you the level of philosophical capture that you have at some of these universities and the way that they think about things.
I think it's just more of a what like a video game skin are they wearing that day? Which is not to say like different costume. When you look at these protests, it doesn't matter what it's like. Oh, it's DEI today. Or they're pro-Palestine today. Palestine. Been in Texas too long. Pro-Palestine today, but it's all about some gender issue, or it's the Earth's on fire. But it's just the same group of people that go from one to the other. And then if they get a big enough crowd, it's college. There's a big crowd. What's going on? And then it just it circulates, and it just becomes. So yes, I think there's certainly ideological capture, and as a former undergrad at UT, can speak to it that there is certainly that. So I was definitely taught critical theory when I was in certain English courses at the University of Texas at Austin. So I was well aware of what CRT was when that became a hot button issue.
So when did you graduate Texas?
I finished in 12, and I'm actually finishing my degree now at a different school.
That's incredible. So when I was in college at Harvard, CRT was basically being incubated at the law school at Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't, I didn't experience it when I was in college, but everything that we see on campus, not only in Texas, but really throughout the country, from a leftism point of view, it was incubated at an Ivy League school.
I mean, I could get in. I mean, and I will. It's my podcast. My understanding is that basically it originated in, or started to become really, really popular at Yale in the English and philosophy departments.
You're absolutely right about that.
And it was an extension of Derridian deconstruction, which is an outgrowth of the postmodernist movement. All of that to say, which is a bunch of academic gobbledygook to say, postmodernists in the 70s or 60s in France end up having this idea that nothing meant anything, so we have to deconstruct everything. There is no inherent truth, and then everything built from that is just based off of those ideas, which, once you get back down to it, means everything is nothing and nothing means anything, which is why they can just say whatever the hell they want, and it changes from day to day.
That's a beautiful 30-second primer on the Frankfurt School. So if you just walk, I mean, and it's a classic tool of the left, because anytime you see Democrats in leadership, it's going to be marked by disorder, decay, and decline. And fundamentally, these are very useful social tools to generate disorder, decay, and decline. And I mean, you see it, if they had taken a foothold at Texas, things would have gotten a lot worse. I'm really thankful that things shook out the way that they did.
I think the governor has done a good job appointing regents and selecting folks for different positions of power currently, at least, because, went in and did not cave to the mob, and, did what his job to make sure that the amount of law enforcement was there to make sure they could protest if they wanted to. That's their right, but they couldn't break the rules. They couldn't camp. They couldn't have big signs, and they couldn't be so loud as to disturb classes going on.
Yeah. Quite a mess. Thankful it's over.
A hot mess. But we've been talking for a while. I definitely appreciate you coming on. So thank you so much. Good conversation. Like I feel like we, once again, I think you and I agree, generally speaking, on the direction things need to move. I think we definitely disagree. As we talked about, we disagree to a certain level on tactics, and sometimes maybe going further on a given issue than the other. But mostly because I want to see if it works. We don't need to open up another can of worms. But I appreciate you coming on. Real quick, any websites or anything you want to promote for yourself while you're on here?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say thank you, first of all, for letting me on your podcast. But, we might have differences, but they're typically variations of color. And I think we as Republicans have the same goal, which is to win. Fundamentally, the goal is to win. And I think we're going to need people from all over the spectrum on the right to be able to do that. And I thank you for the opportunity to be here. Obviously, you can see my handle right there. Let me move over here. At Real Mitch Little on Twitter, or my website is mitchlittlefortexas.com. And Garrett, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the visit. It's wonderful.
Absolutely. And we'll have that link down in the description if you want to click on it. Thank you so much for coming. And for those watching at home or listening in your podcast, we appreciate you for coming on. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, whatever. And we'll see y'all next time. Bye, guys.
You've been listening to the Seeing Red podcast. It's always Texas politics and beyond. We present the facts and opinions. The Seeing Red podcast with your host, Andy Turner and Garrett Fools. Thank you, and tune in next week. And please do us a favor. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode.